Welcome everyone to this DIIS event this afternoon on Germany's approach to the Baltic Sea region and Baltic Sea security, with a question of whether Germany is doing enough. My name is Amelie Theussen. I'm an assistant professor at the Center for War Studies at the University of Southern Denmark. And I have the pleasure of having organized this event and welcoming our three speakers today here. But before I say a little bit more about the format and who we have here as speakers today, I will just quickly hand over to my fellow co-organizer and host here at DIIS, Mikkel Runge Olsen, who is a senior researcher here, and he will tell you just a few words about the context of this event today and sort of the larger project. Mikkel, I'll hand over to you right away.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us here today for this event on Baltic Sea security from a German perspective. My name is Mikkel Runge Olsen, and I'm the coordinator for Baltic Sea research here at DIIS. And I just wanted to let you know that this project is part of a wider DIIS initiative of trying to put Baltic Sea security on the map, and it's part of some research that we do for the Danish Ministry of Defense. So without further ado, I will turn it back to Amelia, who will guide us through the rest of the afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you, Mikkel. Yes, so as part of this larger project that Mikkel has just been speaking about a little bit, I actually spent the last few months here at DIIS researching Germany's approach to Baltic Sea security. And I wrote a policy brief about that approach and sort of what Germany has been doing and what more is necessary. And you can find that online as part of this event description, for example. Otherwise, if you have a quick look at the DIIS website, it can be found under publications as well. For me, I think the biggest takeaway of these last couple of months and the research that I've been doing about Germany and the Baltic Sea region is that it's quite visible that Germany is taking more and more responsibility sort of in a multilateral framework within NATO and within the European Union as well. But that the security situation in the world and also the Baltic Sea region is changing to such an extent and at such a pace that even though Germany is changing its approach, it can't quite keep up. So more is necessary, and faster changes are necessary as well. That was sort of the first thing that I thought was quite interesting. And the second thing I thought was interesting that sprung from the discussions that I've had with experts and practitioners in the frame of this research is that really one can't look at Germany in the Baltic Sea region and Germany's approach to security in the Baltic Sea region without also addressing some of the larger issues about European security, about sort of the changing international order and these type of issues. So today I brought together a group of experts, academics and practitioners to help us discuss these issues and look at Germany in the Baltic Sea and the future of the German approach to the Baltic Sea region. So let me quickly welcome our speakers here today. We have Kai Prozeske, who is a lieutenant colonel in the German Armed Forces and serves as the defense attaché of Germany to Denmark at the German embassy here in Copenhagen. And he will say a few words sort of about Germany's approach to Baltic Sea security and how that has developed and what's happening in that regard. Then our second speaker today is Jakob Hines, a brigadier general at the Danish Armed Forces who serves as the Danish defense attaché in Germany at the embassy in Berlin. And he will, of course, give sort of a Danish perspective on Germany and Germany in the region. And then last but not least, we have Barbara Kunz with us today as well, who's a senior researcher at the Institute for Peace Research and Security Policy at the University of Hamburg. And she primarily works on European security and defense affairs with a focus on 21st century security challenges, and in particular, Germany, France, and the Nordic countries. So she will sort of provide us with a bit of a larger perspective and how that connects to Germany in the Baltic Sea region. I'm very happy that you three can be here today and discuss this topic with me, Mikkel, and our audience. In terms of the format of this event, most of you probably have tried webinars before by now, but the idea here is that each of our speakers will have 10 minutes for sort of an initial perspective on this topic and what they think is relevant from each of their individual perspectives. And then there will be plenty of time for Q&A. I might just kick that off with a first question myself, but then there's plenty of opportunity for you to use this Q&A function that you can find on your screen here to write your question, and I will read it out and we will make sure it gets answered from our panel today. I also speak Danish, so if you prefer to write your question in Danish, you can do that, and then I will relate it in English as well as that's possible, hopefully. Yes, the event will close at 3:30, so we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. And yeah, I hope you will all enjoy it and hopefully learn something today. Without further ado, I will hand over to Kai. Floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. So thanks for having me again. In the next few minutes, I will come up with some ideas and arguments I've aligned with my MOD in Berlin concerning the Baltic Sea region. And yeah, I just start off. The Baltic Sea region is of main geopolitical importance. It is defined by urbanity, intensive trade, various energy political factors, which makes it key for the development of the regional affluence. Germany's economy is characterized by a high amount of naval-based exports. So consequently, the German Navy protects those trade routes in the Baltic Sea area and far beyond. And as the Baltic Sea is part of the eastern flank of NATO, a solid presence of NATO in this part of the world is indispensable. Germany has been aware of the threat posed especially by Russia, at least since 2014, that is with the annexation of Crimea and the conflict in East Ukraine. And in this context, Germany is aware that the events in Crimea and the East Ukraine might be considered as some kind of a role model for future Russian behavior, and consequently might have the potential to spill over to other regions. Maybe to the Baltic Sea region in particular, we don't know so far. But we see a more aggressive and reckless behavior of Russia against Europe. And for example, with the Navalny case, that is only another element that shows the current characteristics of Russian activities. And therefore, and with all this in mind, we assess that the situation, the eastern flank of NATO, is nowadays more fragile than it was in the 1990s. The distinctively developed military capabilities on Russia's side, for example, access denial, or you name it, and also the Russian hybrid activities pose a great threat to the stability and the security of Europe. Considering this, Germany has made new assessments of its national as well as collective defense measures. Germany is therefore expanding its defense capabilities. That means defense of homeland territory as well as within NATO. So the Baltic Sea region plays a prominent role. Germany engages in different operation components. That is, for example, enhanced forward presence, battle group Latvia, Baltic air policing, establishment of the Baltic Maritime Component Command, participation in multinational staffs, that is, for example, a multinational division north and the multinational corps northeast. We regret to know that the US intends to reduce the number of troops in Germany. However, according to the current knowledge, this has no further impact on the defense capabilities of Germany or of Europe. And especially considering the election of Joe Biden as the new US president, we don't expect a serious change in the security policy direction, just a different tone. And as Chancellor Merkel said on Monday, so yesterday, Germany and Europe will have to do more in its own security measures. Finally, a few words on Brexit. That remains thrilling and is still fraught with risk, especially with regards to developments in and between the UK and Ireland. This also links again with the election of Joe Biden. The security policy cooperation between the European Union and Great Britain is in principle established. We want an agreement on that, but primarily because of its symbolic effect. The cooperation is already taking place on an ad hoc basis, and Great Britain is integrated into the European security architecture via NATO. So that should be no big problem. With this said, I think, yeah, start off with that.
All right, thank you very much, Kai. Jakob, I hand over to you now.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Show me a thumb. Yeah, good, thank you. Yes, so I'm Jakob Hines, Army Brigadier General, Defense Attaché in Berlin, sitting in Berlin right now. I have been given the task to present reflections on the Danish perception of Germany's role in the Baltic Sea region. I will do that by focusing briefly on first some political, historical elements, then the operational elements, sorry, the strategic elements, then the operational elements, and then I will conclude, and I will stick within my 10 minutes. I'm pretty convinced I can do that. So no doubt, Denmark sees Germany as a close political ally in general. I mean, both regionally and locally and globally. We share with Germany common borders on land, at sea, in the air. We share common values, common interests. We have comparable political systems. We have comparable cultures, we have comparable religions even, and our languages derive from the same language roots, so we can communicate pretty easily with each other. So we have a lot of things in common. Germany and Denmark have shown the outside world that it is possible to overcome deep historical confrontations and instead develop a harmonious relationship. This year we're celebrating, as some of you may know, the 100 years of the, I hope, definitive Danish-German border, including the mutual respect for each other's minorities living on each side of that border. That is a clear witness of that it can be done to heal the wounds from the past. If we look at the Baltic Sea region, still at this political level, Denmark perceives Germany as a state being interested in maintaining stability and peace and low tension in the Baltic Sea region. We perceive that Germany believes that all nations in that area will prosper from that. One example where we particularly count on Germany is the need to protect the environment in the Baltic Sea. Another example where Germany certainly will also prosper is the delivery of energy, as this is symbolized by the establishment of Nord Stream 2. This all indicates to us Danes that Germany will be generally quite cautious to not escalate political disagreements with, for instance, Russia, like, for instance, over the Navalny case, and to not let such disagreements seriously affect the situation in the Baltic Sea region. That is from what we know now. The future is more difficult to predict, of course. So whether Germany might have to adjust its policy to that towards Russia after the American presidential election, knowing that Joe Biden, like his predecessor, is clearly also against Nord Stream 2, that will be interesting to watch. Still, at the overall level, I would say we Danes also perceive Germany as being generally quite hesitant when it comes to projecting hard power. This is probably due to historical reasons, and particularly since the first, what I personally call the first Cold War, as is because we have almost established a second one now. But since the first Cold War, Germany has taken on, to a large extent, the role of a bridge builder towards Russia, at least until recently. So overall, we believe Germany must balance its position towards Russia against that of the Baltic states, the 3 Baltic states and Poland, who certainly, I think we can agree, would prefer a more robust approach towards the Russians. So to speak, the further away from Russia you get, the more sort of relaxed do countries tend to view Russia's attitudes. And I'm certainly not to judge what is right and wrong here. I will turn now to the strategic level. Denmark is a small state, as you know, at least in some respects, but we have a quite significant geostrategic importance. In some respects, I would dare to say even more geostrategically, even more prominent than the one of Germany. There are 2 main reasons. One is our Arctic possessions, and the other one is our location in the Baltic Sea region. Our unique location in the Baltic Sea is that Denmark, or the one who controls Denmark, is able to control the sea lines of communication in and out of the Baltic Sea. And for a country like Russia, that is of the utmost importance, especially in case of a conflict. So Denmark's unique geostrategic location has also generated our maritime capacity, where Denmark is the world's 5th biggest commercial sea power. So how do we strategically at that level perceive Germany's role in the Baltic Sea region? Well, we first of all believe that Germany understands our role, and that Germany sees the need to cooperate closely, not only with us, but also with the other Baltic states about the security in the Baltic Sea region. We also perceive that Germany is a potential substantial provider of security when we regard Germany's size and economic power, particularly in case of a crisis or a conflict in the Baltic Sea. And we consider Germany's membership of the so-called northern group in NATO as one of the signs of this. I'll now turn to the operational level and state that it's important for Denmark that Germany has taken the lead in establishing the so-called Baltic Maritime Component Command in Rostock. This command will, according to the plans, achieve initial operational capability in 2023 and full operational capability in 2025. It consists of different member states, primarily German, but also Danish and others. We also enjoy, since more than 20 years, the shared Danish, German, Polish multinational core Northeast in Stettin in Poland, a core headquarters that has become increasingly important to coordinate the efforts of the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states. If we add to this, we can mention Germany's participation with staff officers in the newly established multinational division North in Riga. Sven also mentioned that. Kai, I mix you up. Kai. And further, we can mention Germany's lead on the newly established Joint Support and Enabling Command in Ulm. We have German air policing over the Baltic states, I believe now even jointly with the UK in a common air policing group. And we can also mention the historic ties between Denmark and Germany when it comes to mutual training, exercises, maintenance, and so on each other's soil. So in conclusion, on all levels, Denmark feel convinced that we have a very close ally in Germany when it comes to defending the stability of the Baltic Sea region with whichever means. If I should add a little cup of bitterness, I can't resist that. I would highlight that establishing new military headquarters is not the same as increasing the physical ability to project military power. Or in NATO language, command structure is one thing, force structures is something different. So if we do believe, and I don't say either pro or con, but if we do believe that we are facing a long-term tense relationship with Russia, and not just a temporary one based on the current conflict in the Ukraine, then I believe it will demand more military capacities, like ships, aircraft, manpower, and the like, in and around the Baltic Sea region, or on call to deploy to the Baltic Sea region pretty quickly. And this leans, of course, into the ongoing discussion about whether the NATO members should and could spend more on defense. And even if they could, we have to be sure that they are also able to recruit enough personnel to man such increased military capacities. So I will finish with the question, what is enough? That is the big question. So I'll end here and pass the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob. It's a very good question indeed. What is enough? Barbara, I hand over to you now.
Can you hear me now? Wonderful. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you for the invitation. Now, my task here is to talk about Germany's Baltic engagement in a wider context. And I will primarily focus on Germany's military and defense engagement. And I will try to keep the wider context wide beyond the regional context. And as we already heard here, and as Emily also outlines in her policy brief, the relationship between Germany and Russia are, of course, very important in that context, and how Germany views Russia, where you can see that German perceptions of Russia are evolving. And the Navalny case is, I would say, just one last step in a process that's actually been going on much longer. Of course, 2014 was almost a turning point with the annexation of Crimea, which pretty much led also to a shift of language in German discourse, so that nowadays almost nobody talks about Russia as a partner anymore. Russia and the German-Russian relationship is, of course, also very important in how the countries around the Baltic Sea perceive Germany. I think Nord Stream 2 was a key example of that, and maybe not exactly the one that led to Berlin having the reputation it wants to have. All that said, I would still argue that Germany's, especially military engagement in the Baltic Sea region, is not primarily related to Russia or threat perception. It is, of course, related to Russia in the sense that all of these developments were pretty much triggered by the annexation of Crimea. But fear of Russia, or Berlin being convinced that Russia is a massive threat, is, in my opinion at least, not the main reason behind Germany's Baltic engagement, because, as I will try to argue in the following minutes, there are like three more or less classic tenets in German security and defense policy that are better explanations. And the first explanation I would like to offer is simply aligned solidarity. I think that is a value that matters in Berlin, and with especially the Baltic countries and Poland fearing Russia, Germany sought to reassure its allies. So that is one first element in that equation. The second element, or the second explanation, is what has already been mentioned here, is the ambition to do more. And I think there it really makes sense to go back a little bit to what now almost appears as ancient history in 2014. Because what happened briefly before the annexation of Crimea is the Munich Security Conference with, in 2014, 3 speeches by the then Foreign Minister, Minister of Defense, and Federal President, where those 3 people said, yes, Germany needs to do more, Germany needs to step up its efforts, and Germany needs to take on more responsibility for peace and security at large. And those 3 speeches were, of course, the culmination of a debate or a process that had taken place previously at German levels, but also mounting frustration of Germany's partners at German reluctance to do more. And so this was the culmination. But I think what is important to keep in mind is that these debates and these speeches, so we're talking late January, early February 2014 here, still took place in a context when doing more implicitly meant expeditionary operations. That was the kind of defense activities we were talking before the annexation of Crimea, or at least primarily talking in when we were discussing European security. Well, then you had Crimea, and all of a sudden something had to happen sort of in the territorial or collective defense field, if I may distinguish things like that. And I don't want to be cynical or diminish the German engagement, but I think that all of a sudden also provided an outlet for Germany to do more that had nothing to do with expeditionary operations, which are extremely problematic politically in Germany. At a domestic level, public opinion does not like them. Whereas the kind of things you do in the context of enhanced forward presence in the Baltic, for example, is much easier to argue for politically. And also, like, one small detail that must not be overlooked, I think, is the fact that Germany's EFP engagement is technically an exercise, which does not require a mandate from the German parliament. So also making it easier to keep things out of contentious political debate. So I think one of the factors that explains Germany's military engagement in the Baltic Sea region is also that this is an outlet for the ambition to do more. And then thirdly, I think also, and I mean, this has at least implicitly already been said here too, is that Germany's Baltic engagement is not really to be explained by threat perception concerning Russia, but it is to be explained by Germany wanting to support the European security order. And you may use the Charter of Paris as the one element that really embodies that order. But this is a key element in German policy, which also includes, and this is perhaps the part that is not always appreciated in all of the countries around the Baltic Sea region, that it is also a tenet of German foreign policy that dialogue with Russia, despite everything, remains important, and that Western engagement, such as, for example, the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, need to be respected also as one way of sustaining the European security order. So these are three factors that, to my opinion, explain Germany's Baltic engagement much more than just change threat perception when it comes to Russia. Now, to just conclude on the question, how much is enough? I cannot quantify how much is enough, but what seems clear to me regarding Germany in a much larger European context than just the Baltic Sea region is that currently Germany is not doing enough. And there you have the financial aspects with the 2% debate and the capabilities that Germany is lacking and the state of the German armed forces. All of this is very true. However, spending more money or getting more capability still does not solve what I perceive to be the true problem, and I'm of course not alone in that perception, is that I think what is really needed from Germany is more conceptual thinking about European security. And one element of that is, of course, a clearer answer to the question that is, I think, really the very key question of European security beyond all other questions, and that is, do we need a plan B for American security guarantees? And I'm not saying this sort of as an Atlanticist or an anti-American or anything like that. It's just that the answer to that question is provided in Washington, probably very independently from what we here in Europe would like it to be. And so for now, we're just operating on assessments what the answer to this question could be. And these answers we provide are very different in the various European capitals. Paris has a completely different reading from the situation than, for example, Warsaw. And Germany is kind of in the middle where rhetorically, yes, there is these calls by Angela Merkel and others that Germany needs to do more. But if you look at how this translates into actual policies, even down to equipment decisions, I don't really see a lot of ramifications or concrete embodiments of these, I mean, the beer tent speech that by now has become quite famous of Angela Merkel's and more recent takes. And I think a more active Germany in that crucial European debate is something that is dearly needed. Now, last sentence, the strategic compass, which is about aligning or at least identifying common takes on threat perception among EU member states, is certainly a good step in the right direction. However, it cannot be the last step in this debate. So what follows of that will also be a very interesting indicator. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Barbara, for those very enlightening 10 minutes. Well, we now have ample opportunity to ask questions of the panel. So I would encourage you to use the Q&A function that you can find on the bottom of your screen and type your questions there, and I will relay them to the panel. While you are all thinking about your questions and typing, hopefully, I will ask a first question of my own to just kick this off. And I would be really interested in hearing a little bit more about the sort of the consequences if we now have Biden as the new US president. It was mentioned both by Kai and by Jakob and also by Barbara, hinting sort of at the question of US security guarantees for Europe and sort of this context, right? And we all know that Angela Merkel and Donald Trump were not the best friends. And Kai also mentioned the American decision to withdraw troops earlier this summer from Germany and have some come back to the US, have some sort of restationed in Poland, in Italy, and in Belgium. And I would like to hear a little bit more sort of your concrete ideas and your perspective on what this change from Trump to Biden would mean both for Germany in the Baltic Sea, but also sort of for the wider issue of European security. I don't know who wants to go first. You let me know.
Well, this is Jakob. I don't mind going first. This is, of course, a very good question. From the talks I have had here and from what I read also over the last few days, I think I can try and answer that very briefly. And that is, one shouldn't be overly happy in advance. One shouldn't expect that now all the pressure on Europe, considering the 2% and certain other things, would suddenly disappear. But the tone will most likely be more polite. So this is sort of my very brief answer to this. So whether then, I think the interesting question will be, will the tone be so polite that European nations delivering less than the 2% will sort of take advantage of that situation and convince themselves, well, now probably we don't have to do it anyway, or we don't have to work in that direction. That is, for me, too early to say. One could also hope, of course, on a slightly more nuanced approach from the American side under a new administration to the 3 Cs, so that it's not all about cash, but also about capabilities and commitment. And even this is sort of probably my naive hope that someone will come up with a sort of way to measure these 3 Cs against each other, so that doing something more on commitment, for instance, or risk willingness would be able to compensate for providing less cash and vice versa. So I think that I'll end it by that.
Thank you, Jakob. Barbara.
Yeah, maybe to add some thoughts to that. I would think that believing that things will fundamentally change with Biden overestimates the role of this one person in the White House and overlooks a number of strategic or like structural developments that are at play here. And I mean, those structural elements are both at play and what you could call the international system with the rise of China and diverted US attention in other regions of the world. That is one aspect. And I think a second aspect that also must not be overlooked is just US domestic developments, both financially. Maybe the US simply runs out of money to ensure European security, if I may be so blunt here. but also political divisions within the United States on how important European security is. And I mean, there, even if Biden maybe has a different tone, things might not go the way Europeans wanted. And then one final remark is also, I mean, one crucial aspect for Europeans is that we are here on this continent basically stuck in the US-Russia security dilemma. So a lot of developments are pretty much independent from things we can influence anyway. And so this is also something that we should look at more carefully, just because geographically we are in between those two.
Thank you, Barbara. Kai, do you have something to add?
There's nothing more significant to add. Everything's already said. The strategic lines will probably be the same, but the tone will change, as Jakob already mentioned. So maybe it will be a little bit friendlier, but I think the line will stay the same. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you. I have a question here from Hans-Peter Mikkelsen, a retired Royal Danish Air Force major and independent defense analyst. And he's asking, let me read out the question for you. There have been concerns, both in Germany and neighboring countries, about widespread problems with readiness, both for the material and personnel, in both Army, Navy, and Air Force in Germany. What is the situation, and has it affected Germany's ability to participate in various NATO deterrence initiatives?
So I think this question goes in my direction, right? So yeah, Hans-Peter, thanks for the question. Yeah. To be honest, but this is not only a point for Germany, but I think we have different other countries that experience the same problems. Yes, there are problems with readiness when you focus it overall, but when it comes to specific participation in NATO operations, etc., we are still able to match all the things that are questioned to us. So yeah, we are working on this, and I've seen the latest budgetary plannings for the upcoming years, and yeah, we are doing more, but yeah, we are still not finished with all the new equipment we want to get. Yeah.
This is Jakob. If I may add to that, I'm certainly not going to backstab Kai or anything, but from what I read and from the talks I have here, I mean, I think it's also very much a question, like it is in my own country. Yeah, it's good with more money, but can we absorb all that more money? I mean, are we able to, as I mentioned already, are we able to recruit the personnel we need to man additional capacities? And are we able to, in due time and properly and safely, to specify and to acquire and to test and to implement new equipment, complex weapon systems, aircraft, and so on. So I think also in Germany, it's quite, to some extent, a question of being able to do all that in a short time, because right now it's not the money who lacks, it's rather sort of, you know, also you're struggling with some material equipment acquisition projects that are not going in the way you would like, and I can recognize that from my own country as well. So, but I fully also support what Kai said, that I don't see in any way that Germany's current commitments in international operations, for instance, including NATO, that Germany is not able to fill the ranks that they have committed to.
I don't know, Barbara, if you have anything you want to add to this? Okay. Otherwise, let me ask a follow-up question on this, maybe to Kai. Because when you're now saying that Germany is doing more and there are sort of these acquisition projects going on for equipment, would, in your sort of evaluation of the situation, is Germany then doing enough to deal with these readiness issues, provided that, you know, there's limits, of course, to what can be spent on this, and that these things take time? Or are there areas where Germany could be doing more, maybe, that should be part of the next plan, in the limits, of course, to which you can answer that question? Thank you. Kai, did you hear my question?
My internet connection is not the best at home, so okay. Yeah, I think there are some issues, especially with material. On the personal side, it's getting better and better. But as Jakob already mentioned, some complex military systems, tanks, especially aircraft, you name it, they're very hard to develop in a short time. So, for example, this future combat air system that is considered to be ready in 2040. So we have a lot of technological steps to ahead, and we are not even we are just scratching at the bottom. So yeah, it will take some time. We can match all our the stuff we have in NATO or EU-wide, but you cannot say that Germany, as the German forces as a whole, are ready to go attack to some place. But that's the same as any other army in the world as well. So yeah, there has to be the necessity to do more, but yeah, you are limited to spend the money. Also, as Jakob already mentioned, you have, even when you have the money, it's questionable if you get it to get it on the, let's say, on the ground, right? Yep.
Mikkel.
I just wanted to jump in with a question, if I may. Now a lot of us are sitting in Denmark, and a lot of our participants are probably looking at this from a Danish perspective. So therefore, I wanted to ask a more basic question, a bit upfront. What does Germany seek from Denmark as an ally these days? Where would you ideally like to see a strengthening of cooperation between Denmark and Germany? And also, if we flip it around a little bit, I could also ask the other way and say that, well, military cooperation, in terms of military cooperation, Denmark has cooperated with Germany for a while, but when it comes to at least operational cooperation, cooperation with the US, the UK, and France has also taken up a lot of space. So to the Danish side, I would ask the flip question: is there space for more German-Danish cooperation going forward?
I guess that is for me to address first. Yes, I'll grab the last part of your question first. You're absolutely right that over the past 25 years, Denmark has prioritized direct operational tactical cooperation with Anglo-Saxon countries as well as France. So, but not with Germany to any large extent. And it's a quite interesting question. So I think one of the main reasons to this is that, well, Danish units and Danish parliamentary mandates allow Danish military contributions to operate within the full spectrum of what is allowed in international law and in the so-called rules of engagement in any mission. So Denmark has no issues with putting its forces under the command of other countries, and has generally no issues with letting Danish forces use as much hard power as is necessary, as long as I said, it's within the laws and rules of engagement. I think it's not wrong to say that Denmark has had the perception that Germany, and I mentioned that in my intervention to begin with, that Germany is, for good reasons, good historic reasons, a bit more hesitant with letting their forces free, so to speak. And I think that from the Danish Ministry of Defense and also at the military level, it has been considered potentially too challenging to work too closely cooperated with German forces in the field in international missions. And this is probably why we have tended to avoid that. It's certainly not that we wouldn't like to, and I cannot predict what will happen in the future. Potentially, Danish politics may fall back to a line close to the German one, or Germany may move towards a more, should we say, liberal application of applying military power when needed. We may see a few signs of that. For instance, the recent or the expected decision to arm German unmanned aerial vehicles or drones. This is expected to happen by a parliamentary decision very soon. That could be a small step in that direction. So yeah, well, that was my take on that part of it. I think when we talk about regional self-defense in the Baltic Sea region, along the lines of the Article 5 of NATO, if we ever would come to that, I don't see any Danish concerns that Germany wouldn't be willing and able to come up with all they had if it came to that. So I don't think we're so worried about that. It's more sort of the practical cooperation in international missions where we have had some challenges with cooperating too closely together. Over.
Kai, maybe you can speak a little bit to what Germany then would seek from Denmark in terms of cooperation when it comes to the Baltic Sea region and European security.
Yeah, let me just quick add some thoughts on Jakob's points. Yeah, we're taking small steps with the cooperation between our countries. We have some personnel with a helicopter in Bückeborg and with the special forces here in Denmark. Denmark is using the Leopard tank, which is built in Germany. So there are some fields we can work together. When it comes to Air Force, it will become a little bit more difficult because Denmark is changing to F-35s. Germany is not. So I talked with some Danish soldiers here, and we want to come up with a little bit more educational based steps towards bilateral cooperation, sending some Danish guys to the German air operation education and stuff like this. But yeah, it becomes hard when you're using different weapon systems. So it's not that easy to cooperate then. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Barbara, anything to add? No. All right. I have 2 more questions here in the Q&A function. And the first one is from Hans-Peter Michelsen again. Let me just read it out here. It's a little bit longer. There has been some debate in Germany about Germany's participation in NATO nuclear deterrence. The nuclear weapons that were part of the Tornado weapons system is planned for retirement, with the debate about a new fighter aircraft that maybe is not yet authorized to carry nuclear weapons. I have read suggestions to transfer the US nuclear weapons to Poland which is acquiring capable F-35s. Where's this debate right now, and is it wise to rock the nuclear boat?
Okay, I see. That goes in my direction too. There was a debate to carry the nuclear weapons to Poland because they are willing to get these F-35s. The Tornado is quite an old jet. We're trying to get F-16s to be able to get this nuclear share, but it's still in debate, and I'm not quite sure that that we were able to get the F-16s from the US. So yeah, quite challenging to see where we come out with this nuclear share. Let's see. I have no question, no hard question, no hard answer on that one. Sorry.
If I maybe may add something. So the debate is still ongoing, simply, and I mean even the so-called split solution with Eurofighters and the F-18 is still on the table. In a more political sense, my expectation would be that this discussion actually gains traction simply because there will be elections in Germany next year, and Corona cannot dominate the entire campaign. And so on the left, like center and left of the political spectrum, you already have positionings about simply ending nuclear sharing altogether. So I think there will be a debate that has already flared up a little bit in the beginning of this year about just completely getting rid of those US nuclear weapons. That might also lead to debates, but right now, to my knowledge, this debate is not really going on about a Euro deterrent or Franco-German cooperation. So I think this is really open in many ways, and there is a lot of potential for, just completely aside from the military dimension, hot political debates that can end in many different ways, at least I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting debate, and I also thought, from a German perspective at least, it was slightly surprising how sort of that we're discussing nuclear weapons, and some of the things that were on the table suddenly seemed quite interesting for German perspectives. But maybe we can talk about sort of popular opinion and these things a little bit more in a second. I have another question here in the Q&A function, and keep them coming if you sit there with a burning question. This is your chance. The Danish Navy is focusing more and more on the Arctic with its frigates, having no other ships left than very small patrol boats for the Danish Straits. This could mean that Denmark is not really able to participate in maritime security inside the Baltic Sea. Will that mean that Germany and Poland will have to take care of the Baltic Sea together with the small ships the three Baltic countries have? And is the cooperation with Sweden increasing? So a question about sort of Danish priorities towards the Arctic, leaving Germany and Poland to fend in the Baltic Sea.
I guess I could try and grab that. Now, I won't touch upon the increased cooperation with Sweden. I don't know enough about it. But I mean, yeah, we have, of course, to get priorities right here. Denmark has. First of all, let me say, I mean, that even frigates are pretty fast vessels. So in case of the need, I'm pretty sure that we would be able to deploy frigates from the Arctic area to the Baltic Sea if that was where they were needed. So I'm not so worried about that. Like, I'm not so worried to say that if we have soldiers sent abroad to Afghanistan or Iraq, then they would not be able to participate in the regional defense if that was needed, because we would take them home in due time. So it's not so worrying in itself. But of course, Denmark is facing some dilemmas soon, because how can we at the same time prioritize? I mean, if we try to prioritize different areas, you prioritize nothing. We put more and more effort on the Arctic. Unfortunately, as we have seen so far, NATO will not reward us for prioritizing the Arctic, in the sense that the capacities we keep in the Arctic in all three domains do not count as proper contribution to the NATO force structure. So that is sort of so far by NATO considered an add-on on our own behalf, and not something that is really valuable yet for the alliance. How do we then prioritize our efforts in the regional security along the Baltic Sea? Yeah, that is an issue, and I don't have a clear answer to it. We also try to build up a brigade, an armored infantry brigade, with which we are also struggling to try and achieve that in due time. And I cannot say predict how that will end, but at some stage, I guess someone will have to make a more strong recommendation or consideration on what are the core capabilities that Denmark need to be able to stick to our commitments, both nationally and internationally. And at some stage, it will not be possible to put equal priority on all three services as we are trying to right now. That's as far as I will go.
Anybody else who wants to add something to this? No. All right, I have another question here from Niels, a bachelor student in political science at the University of Southern Denmark. Thank you, Niels, for the question. It's a good one. That's on my list as well. And Niels writes that now we have talked about the limitations of the German military and the political will and interest to expand military commitment. But since we are talking about whether Germany is doing enough, I would like to pick up Jakob's point earlier. What is enough? So what should an ideal German military contribution look like, and what could it look like? The same goes for political commitment. What should Germany do to clarify its commitment and future ability to participate? So what should Germany do? What will be enough, in your opinion?
Should I go first? So if we look at what is enough, the question that I also posed, I mean, if we look back during the Cold War, NATO was able to come up with a substantial defense capability that was able to convince the Warsaw Pact that if they dared to do anything towards NATO, the consequences would be too unbearable for the Warsaw Pact, regardless of the final outcome of such a conflict. NATO was able to come up with several army groups from northern Norway down to the southern tip of Italy. NATO was able to come up with air fleets, navy fleets, and so on in huge numbers, plus, of course, the nuclear arm. We are no way near that ability today, but we are also far from the need to be able to come up with such substantial defense capabilities, because Russia stands now alone, and therefore what we are asking for is much less, and still provided, as I said also, that we believe that that we could potentially end up with in some sort of conflict with Russia. I'm not so convinced it's in Russia's interest to risk challenging the Article 5 of NATO. One thing is what they have done to the Ukraine, but that's not the same that they would do likewise for NATO members. But anyway, I'm not to judge how likely that is or not. But to be more specific, what would a German, now seen from a military perspective, what would a German contribution be? I would say, I mean, considering Germany's size, on the land level, something like a corps would be ideal. It's probably not realistic, but at least one or two fully deployable divisions would probably match the size of Germany compared with the size of, for instance, my own country. In the two other domains, I'm simply not yet, I've only been here a few months, I'm not able to say exactly what Germany possesses. But I would say, as I said before, I mean, in case if we really ended up in a conflict in the Baltic Sea region, I'm sure that Germany would do what they could to bring to the table whatever they were able to. But I cannot put facts and figures on it more than I have done. That's my best guess.
Yeah, if I may add some comments, and I apologize for the sort of very academic, non-practitioner-like answer I will give, but what seems important to me is that what is enough is not determined by what anybody's willing to offer, but what is imposed on Europe by the outside world and the threats Europe is facing. I don't even think it makes sense to think about what Germany is facing, because what Germany is facing is at the same time what Europe is facing. So we need to reason at the European level here. And then, of course, the question is, what is the German contribution to the European response? And that is, for example, what I find so annoying, or one of the aspects I find so annoying with the 2% objective, because that is like an internal measure, but that is not necessarily derived from outside necessities. Again, I'm not arguing against spending more. I think it's absolutely necessary, but these 2% don't really tell us so much. And so I often wonder if, as Europeans, we are there, that we know what the outside world is imposing on us, and that from an analysis of that, we would be able to actually derive an answer to the question of what is enough. And just two sort of sub-elements in that question, because this analysis would need to be done, and this is the most important part. And this is where conceptual thinking coming from Berlin would absolutely be needed. But just two sub-elements to that I would like to add is that it is important to not forget about other threats than Russia. Russia is a problem, and what's going on in the Baltic Sea region is mostly Russia focused, but to just bring in a little bit of French perspective here, I mean, what's going on in the South, to just be very generic, is also of key relevance and needs to be addressed. And then the second point is something I would just repeat from a point I tried to make a little bit earlier, is that all of this, to a very large extent, also depends on American security guarantees, simply for the reason that if for whatever reason US security guarantees are less sure for us Europeans than they used to be, the gap we need to fill ourselves is growing bigger. Just again, because what is enough is not determined by what we are willing to spend, but should be determined by what's going on around us in the outside world.
Kai, do you have any thoughts from your perspective on what would be enough?
I think we have some really solid answers on this one, so I have nothing to add on.
But if I may add one thing to what Barbara just said, I fully agree on it, but about spending more and so on, and I'm not advocating for that necessarily at all, but I think it's the military have a tendency to sort of regard what capabilities do exist around us that could potentially oppose us, and therefore we have to build up measures to match that. While others, probably rather politicians, will also include, but we also have to measure or to assess the likelihood of what is around us would consider to oppose us. And that is that is part of the debate, I believe, where the military sometimes could have a tendency to focus on this with a bit more narrow mind than others.
Mikkel, I saw you had your hand up too.
Yes, I just wanted to jump in with a question once more. Barbara brought up alliance solidarity a little while back, and I think that's very good to bring that into the discussion. I would like to perhaps even go at it a little bit more bluntly and ask how much of current policies, and this could be both in Denmark, in Germany, or even broader, would you say have been driven by an increased defense spending and increased focus on the Baltic Sea region, have been driven by US pressure for Germany and Denmark and European countries to do more? And secondly, now with the Biden administration coming in, we touched upon in the beginning that the pressure will be there. US interests are not likely to have changed substantially, but they will likely Biden will likely be more polite, or the Biden administration will likely be more polite about it. Now there, I would like to ask a follow-up question as to whether the nature of the Trump presidency and the Biden presidency are quite the same in this regard, because could one argue that the fact that what should we say, the erratic nature of Trump's policy towards NATO and this feeling of unease, talk about whether Trump might actually be considering pulling, if not pulling the US out of NATO, then at least scaling down US commitment to NATO significantly, whereas Biden was already has already proclaimed himself as a big supporter of transatlantic relations. He was that as a vice president too. There's nothing strange about that. Whether that fundamental difference makes a difference as to how hard the U.S. pressure is felt. So in other words, the fact that people may fear that Trump may be willing to actually do something, even though it's maybe detrimental to U.S. security interests as well, that Trump just might be able to do it, and we don't really think that Biden would be able, would be willing to hurt U.S. interests to send a message, so to speak. Does that make a fundamental difference when we have to look at the kind of pressure coming from the current U.S. administration and the Biden administration going forward?
Well, if I may, I might start trying to give some answers. Now, first on basically what triggered the Germans to step up their efforts. And there, I think, okay, one part is Russia and what happened in 2014. But then pressure certainly mattered, but I'm not entirely sure how much of that is US pressure. US pressure is, of course, important. But I would, for example, also keep in mind that also France and Germany have a burden sharing issue and a burden sharing debate, right? And other European countries also accused or still accuse Germany of not doing enough. There's this famous quotation by Radek Sikorski, who said that, I think it was in 2011, or I don't know if somebody here maybe remembers the exact year, when he said that he feared German inactivity almost more than German activity. So, I mean, this is an old debate, and the pressure has sort of been building up also from within Germany, in particular the think tank community. So I find it very hard to quantify the US well, let's call it contribution there. I would just argue it's certainly not 100%. Now, Biden, I mean, it is very early on, of course. What I find relatively encouraging is to see the amount of commentary also in German press about being careful not to fall into the trap that Biden means a return to back to normal or anything like that. Now, whether that really means that deeds will follow words, I don't know. I hope it doesn't, because if sort of nothing happens now while European security is at the crossroads, and I think that is really the way that needs to be perceived, then if Biden is too polite, this risks to becoming 4 lost years. I think the temptation, especially, well, one day after Corona, will be pretty big to say that, well, let's just invest our money in more useful things than defense. So there would be a need for strong voices on taking defense seriously and not relegating it to like priority 37 because now there was Corona. But I honestly do not believe that the discourse from Washington will, in substance, change so much. So I think the pressure will still be on very, very much. And so that the Europeans don't really have a choice but taking that seriously.
Should just add, yeah, I agree with Barbara. I mean, the pressure will, I'm sure, still be on, as we talked about in a more polite way. I think what we saw, and the pressure in Europe was driven by the US and Donald Trump, but also driven by the past and the transfer from the past to something new. I mean, the past being the international stability operations that we had all got used to running since, I believe, 1992, beginning with the former Yugoslavia. We had Croatia, we had Bosnia, we had Kosovo in 99, I believe, over Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003. And we all got used to, well, that was fine if our structures could simply just produce and keep on sending forces to these areas, and we knew what we went down to. So it was also, the pressure now is also driven by a transfer away from that well-known, or since the last 30 years well-known, and into something that was well-known before 30 years ago, and where we simply all need to find, some would say, to find back the old plans and the old ways of doing things before 1990, based on the new threat perception. And whether that will mean anything from the American side, I don't know. I'm sure that the new administration will maintain the same threat perception as we have now. Of course, not just on Russia, but also further away. So just touching upon what was this driven by? I think it's not. It's actually, it would be unjust to put all the guilt on Donald Trump.
Kai, anything to add? No. All right. I think, sort of from my perspective, maybe this links nicely what Barbara has said about the pressure sort of building on Germany and Europe to do more. Links nicely also, I think, to Niels's question about what is enough, because I think that's also part that should be part of the consideration, at least, right? That if there is pressure from allies on Germany, not just the US, to do more, then I think that's also an indication sort of that in the direction of what is necessary, right? And sort of the extent to which Germany needs to do more is based on this criticism that's often issued when it comes to sort of Germany's rhetoric, that's ambitious, right? But there's a lack of sort of action, so what do you call it, like undermining, building, or supporting this rhetoric. And I think there's sort of a closer look to what our close allies, and not just the US, but for example, France, say and expect, might also actually help to direct Germany and sort of answer part of the question, at least, what would be enough, right? Just as a thought based on sort of my own policy brief and the research that I've done for that. I have no more questions in the Q&A, but there's time for more. If you sit there and have some, write them down. Otherwise, let me ask a question about sort of Germany's history and popular opinion, because a lot of times it's you hear this, right, that Germany can't really do more because of its history and because popular opinion in Germany says that there's no support for a larger role for the Bundeswehr, for more money to the military. But I actually thought it was quite interesting that the latest report by the Munich Security Conference, it's called Zeitenwende. You should have a look at it if you find German foreign and security policy interesting. It's very interesting and a comprehensive report. They've actually found, they've done their own research into popular opinion, and they found that Germans actually have a high appreciation of the Bundeswehr, and they are also not against Germany taking on more responsibility and even Germany taking a more active role. What they're more skeptical towards is sort of the military use for combat operations, while training and stabilization missions are quite supported, actually. And I found that quite interesting because it gives a little bit of nuance to sort of what is possible, and that this, what you often hear from German politicians, is that this won't be supported, it's not possible. It's not quite true, especially when it comes to sort of increasing defense spending and making necessary reforms. So I was wondering whether, Barbara, you and maybe Kai, you also could add a few words to that and add your perspective on this change in popular opinion. I mean, is that what you also feel? Is that what's happening?
Yes, if I maybe can start on this. I mean, this is all based on anecdotic evidence, what I'm saying now, but I think I can actually sense that same development just from, well, not during Corona times, but before Corona, just being out, talking to people after public conferences and things like that, is that, of course, Germans remain probably among the most skeptic nations when it comes to finding military solutions to problems and things like that. And also the standing up the armed forces, I think, in public opinion is still not comparable to what's going on in the United States or in France or any of these countries. I mean, whether that is necessary or not is of course another question. But no, I mean, I sometimes really have the impression that politicians like to hide behind this alleged or actual public opinion and say, well, this is the reason why we cannot do more. And I also believe that what Germany would need is a more courageous debate about that, with especially on sort of the left, center left side of the political spectrum, where this spectrum should not shy away from having a debate really leading, even including like the very big questions like nuclear deterrence or deterrence at large, actually, just not just nuclear. I think many Germans in sort of the general public could actually be convinced of the necessity to do more if there were stronger proponents also in public debate for this, for more spending and so on. I mean, it's a lot easier to find politicians who will argue against the 2% than politicians who will argue in favor.
Yeah, just to add a few thoughts. I think it's getting better and better, but I think we will not see the German military to be active, proactive when it comes to we will be reactive on this one. So we will react, but not act pro. I also think it's getting a little bit better because the visibility of the German forces within societies is increasing right now. It started with German soldiers can travel for free in the Deutsche Bahn, and I'm not quite sure about the number. I think we are close to 5,000 soldiers right now helping out with Corona. Actively in the in taking care of, I don't know the exact words when you come to trace down the infections. So yeah, I think it's getting better, but we will still be cautious on when it comes to enable the military.
If I may add a little from a Danish perspective, just briefly about, I think we are pretty much in the same situation as Germany. I mean, first with regards to the esteem of the armed forces in the population as such. I mean, certainly not comparable with the one that you can enjoy in the US or in the UK or elsewhere. But on the other hand, also not despised. But I think when we look at the popular opinion, at least in my country, it was much easier to convince the population to spend taxpayers' money on the military when we ran international operations where the politicians were able to tell the public this is in order to contain Islamism. I think it will be much more difficult, and it is probably much more difficult to convince the population that we need to spend more money because of the Russians. Because I don't think that Danish citizens, and neither do I believe that German citizens, consider Russia of having any particular influence on their daily life, as opposed to what they certainly, or many certainly would find that radical Islamists would affect their feeling of safety. So I think the more we move into the direction that we are already moving on, of looking sort of more inwards, looking more on being able to meet the Article 5 requirements in our own region, the more challenging might we find it to convince our populations to spend more on the defense.
Yes, Mikkel.
Yes, thanks for allowing me to jump in again. I just, now that we are nearing the end, I just wanted to ask a much more broader question and ask Baltic Sea region security in 5 years. Where do you see it, and what will need to be done to prepare for the Baltic Sea region in 5 years?
Who wants to start?
I don't mind. I would say the answer to that will depend entirely on how the relations with Russia develop, and more specifically, how the relations between Russia and Ukraine develop. Because if Russia and Ukraine would achieve or reach any sort of solution to the problem, I think we would have a chance of facing a détente in the area. I'm not considering that Russia would in any case give back Crimea, but a solution in the eastern part of Ukraine could be reached potentially. And if Ukraine would be willing to reach some sort of understanding with Russia, I think the whole situation might become less tense. And as I do not know the answer to in which direction that will go, I find it hard to say how the Baltic Sea region should be looking like in 5 years from now, from a defense policy perspective. Over.
Well, if I may, I would like to move up to the big picture once more, because to Ukraine, I would add the relations between Russia and the West more generally, but also Russia and the United States. Assuming that, at least to a certain extent, what Ukraine is about for Russia is not an end in itself, but sort of a means to an end, and the end is, to be very blunt, to annoy the West and the United States. And so if you share that assumption, then you really are at the big picture systemic level, where like arms control, strategic stability, and all these factors come into play. And how that develops well, I simply cannot predict, but I would assume that what's going on at the regional level in the Baltic is sort of, at least to a large extent, a function of these bigger picture developments, and that a lot of that is in the hands of the White House, where we Europeans can just hope that things go in the right direction, but we do actually have very little influence on that.
Yeah, just a quick add-on. I think 5-year period for the Baltic Sea region is a little short, but yeah, it mostly depends on the development between Russia and the West. I think that especially the 3 eastern countries will probably gain the ability to react more robust within these 5 years. And yeah, let's see how it develops, but I cannot predict it.
If you want a different time horizon, please, by all means, 10, 20 years, take your pick.
The longer it lasts, the more robust the countries will get. So yeah, but it all comes down to the relationship between Russia and the West, I think.
All right, thank you all very much. I will take the liberty to add one thought that just crossed my mind when it comes to popular opinion. Because I find that what I found quite interesting, sort of talking to people also from the Baltic states, was this idea also that for them, Germany used to be an insecurity provider, right? It used to be a threat itself. And that actually took quite a while in the Baltic states, at least, to sort of get popular opinion over that. And you can see a slow shift sort of from perceiving Germany more as a threat to now perceiving Germany more as a security provider and an important one in the region. And I thought that that was an interesting development that sort of plays nicely into Germany's history, but also Germany sort of moving on from that history, that I think should also be taken into consideration when we speak about Germany's approach to the Baltic Sea region, just as an add-on to that question before. Other than that, we have 2 minutes left, so I think we will end here and say thank you so much to our panelists for today, to Barbara, to Kai, and to Jakob. Thank you so much for joining us. And to the audience, thank you so much for listening and for asking really good and interesting questions and debating this with us. And yeah, stay in touch. Thank you so much for joining and have a nice afternoon.